Hello, I'm Yoo-Soo from Korea Energy Economics Institute. I'm moderator for the first panel discussion. And I really thank all the three presenters. VLE is getting a lot in the power system these days. So in terms of stability of the system, how to deal with this issue, it is important to acquire and secure reliability of the interconnection. It is being considered by many nations as well. So the professors and the presenters explained well about that. Do Tae-hyung, the professor, he explained how to secure flexibility, and Ito explained and deals with frequency issues and how to well manage the system. He talked about the issue in a technical perspective, and Michael Pollitt, he explained the current power system, even though we are expansion of rollout of renewables, the interconnection could be well managed and how it will be managed well. And the three presenters well explained about the topics. And about the three presentations, actually we have two panelists for having discussion. And first panelist is Sung-Kwan, professor from Korea University. And second panel discussant is Kyeong-seob from Korea Power Exchange. And first, we'll have a discussion from Sung-Kwan. Nice to meet you. I'm Sung-Kwan from Korea University. I will briefly talk about what I'm thinking about the three presenters. For the first presentation, and with expansion of VLE, it has some impact on the systems, and he dealt with how to deal with the growing renewables in systems. And the vulnerabilities will need to could cause some economic issues in the system. Ultimately, because in order to address the vulnerability issue, we have to acquire flexibility and also expansion of transmission and distribution lines. And carbon neutrality and expansion of renewables and NDC enhancements are talked about these days. And by 2030 and 2050, we have set some targets. And we have some I'm thinking about how it will look like in 2030 and 2050, and with expansion of renewables, how the system will look like. We could imagine and think gas based on the Jeju province's power system. Jeju is experiencing expansion of rollout of renewables. And from 2015, it is experiencing oversupplying issues. And from 2015, the province is putting some limits on wind power generation. And from this year, the wind power generation is growing a lot, very remarkably these days. And it started from Jeju Island, but in 2030 and in 2050, it could happen in the mainland of Korea. So I looked through the carbon neutrality scenario, and it has three scenarios. When we look at the renewables, it does not mention about the specific capacity. However, when I guess, solar will produce about 400 or up to 500 gigawatts of generation. That is something I could estimate. And with this proportion of renewables in power generations, the power generations of solar, like worth of 400 megawatts, it could disappear when the sun set. And after sunset, the solar power will disappear, and it could lead to the disappearing of power generally. And the supply, like demand, cannot meet the supply. So we have to put some limits on demand. But on daytime, the 400 megawatt solar power, if combined with wind power, then renewable energy will go up. Then the supply will surpass the demand. Then we have to put limits on supply of renewable energies. So like limits on demand and supply have to be carried out to address the issue. Then it requires a large amount of ESS. Then how much it will cost in investments in ESS and other technologies, it has been talked a lot by many people. And it cannot be reduced, it cannot be dealt with only investment in technologies. And we are operating the system by forecasting demand. But we have to we have to well manage the demand. Then the demand, when we think about the demand manage, we think about reducing, like reduce the demand. But also in demand managing refers to raising demands as well. So rising, like increasing and decreasing demand is very important. And electric vehicle charging services and sector coupling, those technologies will be used for demand managing system. And when we have more expanded renewable energies, then in terms of powers markets and in terms of interconnection, how could we deal with the issue? In terms of the market response, I will deal with the contents. The three presenters understand that the ESS or fast DR and gas turbine we have to acquire and secure very flexible resources. We could make it mandate to secure flexible resources. In Hawaii, it has some systems to meet some policies and mandates. Then the power generators need to be equipped with ESS to be in the market. And this making mandate could be one solution. Also, we have to give some economic incentive system to make sure private generators could increase flexibility. And in the ancillary system, we have some issues. The second presenter dealt with reserves are very important in the VRE system. And we have enough amount of reserves, and also we have very fast speed in response, and also the frequency, response need to be maintained. In those requirements are for general existing power generators, but we have new types of generators. Then the requirements will be applied to the new generators as the same as the existing generators. We have to think about, and also we have to lower the barriers for participants of the market.
As mentioned in the case of the UK, after the battery service providers left the market, there was a change in the price. As you can see in the case example, the new power service providers can play an important role in adjusting the price in the electricity market. So we need to enable ancillary service providers and new service providers to access the electricity market easier than before. And also, as Professor No mentioned, we have to solve those issues in the market. Also, we can think of the option of real-time based market and ancillary service market. When we open an ancillary service market, actually, the current existing ancillary service structure of Korea was created in the past when the portion of renewable energy was very low. So we need a change. We can think about the inertia service or fast frequency service, and many other ancillary service products are required. Such services need to be put to the system quickly, so we need investment. Creating new products is important, but what is also important is to ensure proper unit price. So the unit price must be higher than the reserve. So inertia or fast frequency could be facilitated once there are sufficient system of incentives or compensation. And real-time market or ancillary market creation is being discussed in Korea. Actually, the same power generator can sell energy and sell products to the ancillary service market as well. So the ancillary market and energy market could be co-optimized together so that we can reduce the total cost of energy. And in terms of the electricity system, these days, one of the most important things is to address the uncertainty of renewable energy. There are errors in estimation of the supply and demand. To address this problem, we have to think about various systems, for example, putting incentives. And another important thing is that the renewable energy itself could provide a reserve. By 2050, maybe more than 60% of the energy will be supplied from renewable energy. Then the general energy sources may not have sufficient resource for reserve. So by 2050, renewable energy could be utilized as a source of reserve. Then we need to develop technologies of adjusting the output of renewable energy. And as renewable energy increases, the constraint cost increased, as you can see from the presentation from the UK. So we need to operate the reserve system in an elastic way. And while renewable energy is intermittent and highly volatile, we can manage the reserve power at a different level from the period when the renewable energy is in different situation. And as I mentioned, renewable energy can create various issues in the electricity system, but in the future, renewable energy will be the key source of energy. So the issues created by renewable energy should be solved by the renewable energy sector. VPP can be a possible solution. So in order to develop such technologies, we need to develop systems and institutions in the market. unless there is a policy to allow VPPs to enter the market, we cannot develop and commercialize and apply the VPP technology to reality. So we need to improve the market structure and policies so that the renewable energy sector can solve the issues that they create themselves. Thank you very much for your comments. He mentioned a lot of things. First, he took the example of Jeju Island. He said that in Jeju Island, the renewable energy, especially the wind power, is being curtailed because there is significant amount of oversupply of renewable energy in Jeju Island. And regarding the response to the improvement of electricity market, he mentioned the system of providing incentives and reforming the market structure in a way to encourage competition so that we can lower the price and also secure flexibility resources in the market. In terms of our response to the issues of the electricity system, he mentioned that we need to be able to predict the output of renewable energy in a more accurate and precise manner. And it was very impressive that he mentioned that renewable energy create potential issues in the electricity system, and we have to develop various systems and technologies for the renewable energy sector to solve the problems that they create themselves. I am also going to make some comments. First of all, thank you for the presentation and the comments of the previous discussant. KPX feels heavy responsibility. Actually, we have a lot of tasks before us, and many of the tasks need to be harmonized. Then how can we find a feasible solution to various types of tasks? We are faced with various challenges that require feasible solutions. And you made the presentations and also gave us recommendations. First, Professor No has taken a great interest in the KPS activities, and he gave us meaningful advice. In order to improve the electricity market, we need to ensure risk management, in other words, hedging tools to ensure stable financials. But that has been very difficult for us to do. Can you give us some alternatives or some comments that will help us prepare proper hedging tools to manage the risk in the electricity system to ensure financial stability? And Professor Pulit from the UK said that we may not be at a time to conduct radical market change, but Korean market is different from the European market. Korean electricity market is not as advanced as the European market, and the Korean market is faced with quite great potential changes, I think. And in the European market, maybe they may also need the racial changes. And I feel that the racial change you mentioned was not explained in detail, so I'd like to ask you to explain more detail about the changes required for the European electricity market. And load or demand has great potential.
But utilizing this load has potential to address the issue. So in order to utilize the load, we have to get all the distributed resources integrated into the market. That is one challenge. that we have to address. So, like how to address that issue, I will ask Mr. No and Polit for to give us some comments or recommendations to address that issue. And Jo Ito talked about the importance of the primary frequency control and the frequency controlling mechanism. And I totally agree with him. And he like showed some examples, but I'm so sorry that like there is no Korean cases and practices. And so I think the research need to be carried out for a long time. And whether the voting countries are conducting this research regularly, I wonder. If it is, then how like long and like what is the frequency of the research conduct? And also about the like based on our experience and generators logic analysis is important, but the scheme of renewables are affected by the renewables as well. And distributed controlling system requires a lot of time and effort to fix the system. So prediction and preparation is very important. Like in terms we could use existing resources in dealing with the frequency issue. I think we need to think about that as well. And also using new technologies were emphasized by Jo Ito as well. So I ask you to explain the new technologies as well. That's all. Thank you for your comments. Moon Kyeong-seob asked many questions, and KPX needs to address, but has some difficulties in dealing with the issues. So Mr. Pollitt, he asked a question to Pollitt with growing ratio of renewables. Radical changes is not required for the moment. Then the radical changes in market system, the Mr. Pollitt, could you explain about that later? And also he talked about the renewables integration into the current market. And Mr. Law or Pollitt could give some answer to that issue. And to Ito, you emphasized the first frequency response and with like how often the research is being done. That's what he asked. And controlling system technologies, also that's what he asked. That's all the comments from the two panelists. And about the comments of the two panelists, it's time for presenters to give some comments or give some answers to the questions asked by the two panelists. Mr. No, please.
Mr. Moon mentioned the difficulties in hedging the risks. Market participants currently do not have any incentives to do hedging because in Korea the electricity market is based on monopoly system. So So the only thing they can do is just to transfer the risk to the consumers if any risk takes place. But with the increasing proportion of renewable energy, we may have increasing risks in the electricity market. But even if you require the participants of the market to do risk management or hedging activities, then the participants currently do not feel the necessity to do hedging the risks in the current Korean market. And as for flexibility, the electricity system transaction market in Korea is basically based on monopoly system. So people participating in this system may not feel the necessity to manage risks. So KPX may need to consider various types of contract. And in the case of the sellers of, or they will also need to think about the risks, potential risks in the market, so that they can effectively respond to the risk in the future. In terms of the using the flexibility resources related to load, maybe when there's an innovative idea, the person who proposed the innovative idea must be able to earn a lot of money, but that is not guaranteed in reality. People will pursue innovation if they think they can earn money from that, but that is not happening for now under the current market structure in Korea. So I think such opportunities must be created, opportunities for innovators to make a financial benefit. Thank you. Then I would like to ask Professor Plitt to answer the question from Mr. Moon. And I would like to add one more question. You showed us a graph in your presentation, which was very impressive. When Professor No made presentation, some of your graph was closely related to the presentation of Professor Rowe. Professor Rowe said that if we look at the cases of other countries, if we see price fall in the market, then market participants feel no need for facility investment, and that will lead to the lack of power supply and even blackout. And Professor Rowe mentioned that the carbon price increase also played an important role in adjusting the level of price at a certain level in the market. And you also mentioned that we may not need a radical change in the market design and structure. So this is our question.
Well, thank you. Those were a lot of good comments. Let me try and just say, I want to say three things that I think that in response to some of the questions that you've raised. First of all, there was a sort of a set of questions around what does a radical change to the market design look like? And I think the question here is the future of the market design just about more prices? You know, it's just about more markets, more prices. For those of you who've heard of Fred Schweppe, a sort of famous power engineer who suggested that, well, all you need to do is price electricity at every node, and you need to expose demand and generators to that. That is one view of the world. Okay. Another view of the world is that we need more control. You know, we need more telling people when they can use electricity in response to the load condition. People's electric vehicles will just not get charged if there's no renewable electricity available, and they will have a contract which is very flexible and isn't reflected in prices. It's simply, you know, I will have one contract which says my vehicle will be charged sometime between 7 p.m. in the evening and 6 a.m. in the morning. And I can have another price. I can charge it immediately, but I'll pay a very large price for that. So I think a radical market redesign thinks very carefully about what the control algorithms would be and how much control you could put into the system to, if you like, ration electricity when it's not available. And I think that would be, it would involve some smart contracting. It would take account of the fact that both customers, citizens, and governments care about electricity prices, and they don't like them being volatile, and they don't like them varying in time and space. So a radical rethink, moving away from this idea that it's just about market prices. I think we're gonna get there eventually, and I would watch what happens in China very closely in that sort of area. The other thing that hasn't been mentioned is what the role of the system operator is. I think if you're going to have a variable renewable electricity system, you have to have an independent system operator, which is doing system-wide optimization and thinking about what services are really required on the system, and what could be procured competitively. So, we've had a long discussion in the UK about moving towards an independent system operator because we can't trust anybody else in the system to do that sort of system-wide optimization and identification of what needs to be procured going forward to support the system. And then the final thing that we haven't mentioned is the role of the regulator. And I think some of your questions were around risk. It's the job of the regulator to think about systemic risk in the electricity system. So we've had this issue in Europe recently about gas prices going up, certain suppliers that bought electricity on short-run contracts but sold it to customers on an annual long-run contract. That was a deeply irresponsible business model and should have been regulated by the regulator. So energy regulators across the world take positions on the hedging strategies of retailers and also monitor the overall costs of the system and the rates of return that companies are generating within the system. And we rightly regulate that. We don't want people making vast amounts of money out of the electricity system. So, I think thinking about what the role of the regulator is in managing some of these systemic risks and keeping an eye on costs and making sure that customers are not being ripped off, that is very important going forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer. We do not have many time, but I will ask Jo-Ito to give us answer to the question of Moon. Mr. Moon.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'll comment on 2 or 3 of the items that I heard. I think the first question that I heard was about the frequency of study or the importance of studying the requirements for frequency response. And I'll describe the way in which it is practiced in this country. For these frequency response events where you lose a large generator or a big transmission line occur with varying levels of frequency. In the very large eastern interconnection, they're almost a weekly event, sometimes almost daily. In smaller interconnections with fewer generators, like in Texas, they might happen a couple of times a month. But the point of them is that they're unplanned, and so the system must be postured in a way that they can respond automatically in order to keep the lights on. And so after each of these events takes place, that is the initiation of study. And in particular, what is recorded are things like what was the frequency nadir, the lowest frequency that was recorded before it was arrested and restored. How long did it take to restore frequency to the target value? And depending on the findings of those measurements, and they do require special measurements that go beyond the traditional SCADA and EMS, which is only scanning the system every 4 to 10 seconds. It requires higher speed monitoring technologies that can actually capture the lowest frequency that is reached before frequency becomes restored. Then modeling is conducted, and the modeling, to be useful, requires accurate data on the capabilities of the generators. Both, we talked about the inertia of the generators that were online at the time of an event, as well as the capability of the generators in terms of which ones had headroom, the ability to provide primary frequency response, and which ones actually provided for primary frequency response, which was to say that their governors were operating set in a droop mode that allowed them to provide frequency response. That requires collecting information from the generators on how they were scheduled to operate during the time that the events take place. And this takes place on more or less a continuous basis. And rules get changed when is deemed appropriate to try to strengthen the requirements because the concern is very great about blackouts. Texas, for example, has very, very stringent requirements for frequency control. And you can see from the information I provided about that they are a very small interconnection with respect to the consequences of a very large generation loss event, that they must be very prepared. And this really brings me to the second question, which is the new technologies. And there's a number of new technologies that are capable. One that I didn't spend enough time on is the role of demand response or load. Texas, as an example, relies on load response to provide half of its frequency responsive reserve. This has been a necessity because of the relationship between the size of that interconnection and the largest generation loss event that they want to design for. They simply cannot arrest frequency fast enough with the actions of the available turbine governors that are online. And so demand has been used routinely for many years to provide frequency control. And these are large customers who subscribe and are paid for having under frequency relays, which will take portions of their load off automatically, well above the under frequency load shedding set point that is set for the entire interconnection. So they are a contribution that augments and supplements the frequency control that is provided from other turbine and generators, turbine governors. The other technologies that are being used, and I think the hallmark of them is that they're faster. Batteries, solar when it has headroom, which can be done, and wind when it has headroom, are all connected to the power system through power electronic converters. And these systems can inject power much faster than turbine governors because they don't rely on mechanical increases in power to generate the injection. And so they are in principle much more valuable resources to the system operator as load is in Texas. And so there is a discussion going on in this country about whether separate markets or services should be defined for faster frequency responsive reserves in view of their beneficial characteristics in these primary frequency response settings. I would like to close with just something that I just have been hearing as an undercurrent here. And really, we have a combination of independent system operators and vertically integrated firms operating in both interconnections in the United States. But what underpins their ability to work collectively to provide frequency response are mandatory reliability rules. So these are the rules that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission was given authority to enforce after the 2003 blackout. And so the physical requirements for adequate frequency response are ones that I've described in my talk. And those principles are enshrined in mandatory reliability rules that are applied regardless of what market setting a generator or a power system might be in. Let me just close by talking about the difference between market procurement and regulation. This is a very interesting approach. We have a number of hybrid approaches in the United States. And a good example is, in certain system operators, they will set a requirement for spinning reserve based on the need for how much primary frequency control they want to have available at all time. But they will procure that requirement competitively by having an ancillary service market for spinning reserve. And so they're looking for both a combination of market forces to bring out the lowest cost resources, but having a firm engineering requirement for the quantity that must be procured. That concludes my remarks. And again, I thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this conference.
Thank you for your answer and comment. And we have 3 more minutes to go, but I think we have to wrap up this discussion. I have also personal question, but I think it's time to wrap up. Maintaining reliability in the system has 2 aspects: security and adequacy. Security could be related to the demand and supply balance, which is fluctuate in real time. And with rollout of renewables, in order to respond to the variables, we have to secure flexible resources. Then it need to be addressed by the market. That was the common point by the 3 presenters. About the market system, I think the most effective solution is to provide incentives. That could be one conclusion. And also resource adequacy could be an issue as well. And depending on the price of wholesale market of electricity, it is related to the price. And so how to maintain the price inadequately, that could be one issue that we have to consider as well in designing the power market. And it's 59. And thank you all the presenters and discussants and professors from overseas. We have different time zones, so it's very difficult for you to be here. And also thank you to discussants. And we will wrap up this panel discussion. Thank you.